Welcome to be on the press release of production of Gold Calls, in which we take the time to speak with small cap executives after they put out important news. For those of you who love the clean tech revolution, renewable energy revolution, you're going to love this interview with Cleantech Power, because the company's announced an acquisition that could potentially add $1.5 million to annual cash flow and take their existing pipeline of business up to $150 million. What I love about this company, we've talked about before, it's got both the traditional heat and power business, great foundation. Then it's got the near-term fuel cell business, potentially in the B2B side, and then the long-term hockey stick hydrogen power fuel cell for the consumer market, B2C. Let's talk about this acquisition. Frank, welcome back, my friend.
Hey, George, great to be here.
All right. It's not often we get to say potential to add $1.5 million in annual cash flow and potential to take the company's pipeline of business up to $150 million. So, numbers aside, how big is this transaction? And then let's go into some of these numbers and flesh these out a little more.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the transaction I think is big. It's certainly big for us. While we already have one operating combined heat power plant in Toronto, this puts that on steroids. So we have several more. We're only buying them when they're operating. So, to differentiate, right? We're not getting money to build things that take another 3 quarters or a year to build. These will be operational. So immediate, sort of accretive immediately. So I think it's big. It's huge for us. Just a few months ago, we put out a 2023 priorities. And we had said, look, we need to, in this financial market, we need to get to EBITDA positive as quickly as we can. We've laid out a marker out in next year, and this will help us get there pretty quickly, and obviously more things to do after this one. But this is important because I want to stop being a burden to investors. We've done our best to reduce the burn significantly, almost down to nil now in Europe on our fuel cell. We have the prototype. So the goal was only spend money as we needed to on pilots going forward until that thing takes off. This CHP business needed to really ramp up, and this was a way to ramp it up. It's better to use funds towards operating assets than even just developing. But we have both. And so, having these assets bring us, let's say, in 2023, depending when we closed all the assets that we're acquiring, that's another 1.5 million in sort of EBITDA from those projects. In addition to a total pipeline, we'll then have 150 million of projects we can continue to move through. And it just works better when you have now, 13 plus million in assets already on our books. So it's significant.
I mean, $150 million pipeline, is that over what period of time would that be? Because that's just a massive number.
It's really important. It's one thing if we tried going after even our $50 million pipeline, which we are, but to try to do that in this market with high interest rates, and we don't have many assets on our books in order to secure the proper funding to move those ones, without tremendous, dilution. Having assets on the books, having, say 13 million in assets on the books with earnings attached to them, it gives us a far better footing to raise the additional capital, support developing these additional projects. But, there's a few generic numbers I'll put out there. If everything we're building, we're looking at sort of a 10% unlevered return is sort of the standard rule of thumb. So put that out, that's, if we did 150, that's 15 million annually of sort of unlevered earnings on that. Generally in the public markets, those type of utility type assets should get between 15 to 20 times earnings. So that's what you're looking at from a market cap perspective on that business alone. Is certainly puts it over $200 million easily on the low end of that, is what that looks like. And really, what is the determinant of how quickly we deploy our capital to build those out? And that's without trying to get new deals in the door. It's really just contingent on, okay, where are interest rates at? What's going to happen there? If we reach the peak, I believe we have reached the peak of interest rates. As they start coming down, there's a lot better visibility as to what those earnings are going to be on those projects, how much debt you can apply to them, what they can afford to take on in debt. So those, so is it 3 to 5 years? Is it a bit longer? It could be a bit quicker. I think as those market conditions play out, that allows us to determine how best to do it, right? Many companies have faced this challenge of You have a number of projects you have to get finished. How best to raise that capital to do it. In, maybe I'm trying to minimize dilution in a way that obviously can hurt investors. I'm trying to do this in a way that is meaningful, valuable for investors, and makes sense for where the trajectory we're on. This would be significant for the company. So really excited.
By the way, this is non-binding.
Yeah.
So it's not a firm deal yet, but typically in these kind of deals, it's just the standard due diligence, right? You're just going to go through the books to make sure. And by the way, you also have to be cryptic in who it is. There's no real specifics. I understand why you're protecting that. But in essence, you're going through, if you're acquiring Georgecom, heat and power.
Yeah, there's the due diligence left to be done. Yeah, the due diligence is important. We're in the middle of that to get that done. Really, it's just, is a due diligence going to find something we didn't want to find, or what's that at, and just crossing the T's and dotting the I's with respect to whether reps and warranties in various aspects. But we're very comfortable with what we got at from a valuation perspective. I think they are too. And it's really just complete our due diligence. And really, the other part of this is we know we'll be able to apply senior debt to these projects.
Right.
So even our equity requirement or equivalent and say sub debt is much less, obviously, than say the 12.5 million we've already publicly stated that we have to contribute towards. So it's a fraction of that is going to be our equity or sub debt equivalent. So having 5 million in debt notes it helps having access to that. But I'm certainly in the process of what strategic partners make sense to use to do this with. And remember, that's just one component. I'd love to be able to find a way to then complete, a pathway to completing our $150 million worth of pipeline, and how do we move those through to commercial operation date themselves. So it's really trying to understand what's the best way to use and leverage notes and cash and support acquisition capital along the way. But it's great to know we have access to 5 million debt notes to start this conversation.
If everything goes decently well in the due diligence process, it's never perfect, but if it's not squeaky perfectly clean and no major surprises, ballpark, what do you expect the ETA to convert this from non-binding to,
Yeah, well, I don't expect, we haven't said publicly the date, but I don't expect once the due diligence is done, it's really just, pick the closing date for the first batch of assets that are already operational. I certainly would say the expectations are this year, both sets of assets could be under our company, certainly the first half of them. So we'll see how that plays out. On the second tranche of assets, they're already in the process of being built along the way. So it's really just a question of when they get completed. We're not going to be in control of that, and that's fine. So when they do reach a certain output of each of those projects post-commercial operation date, and that's when we're able to close those deals. So certainly I feel comfortable to have a great end of 2023.
And I found this to be really interesting. I don't know how many people picked this up in the press release, but a quote, certain of the projects associated with the CHP assets are subject to contract terms between 15 and 20 years. I mean, these aren't 2-3 year deals.
No, so George, that's interesting. I was thinking about that earlier. I think
amazing.
Granted what these are, right? So these are long-term contracts with condo corporations, with other parties that we're providing, X% of their power load in their facilities. We make it, they're taking it type application type scenario. And generally they're all within that sort of 50 to 20 ourselves, and we're developing projects. We're already looking at 25 years. And so that's how long these contracts would be. And you have some renewal capital along the way to execute or to sort of reinvest. But these are long-term contracts that are a combination of ways you do them. We've traditionally done them based on a discount from what you would have paid to your local utility. These could be slightly different from that, but these are long-term contracts. This is the alternate asset class.
That would significantly differentiate from all small cap and even bigger companies, but especially the small caps, like all small cap clean tech renewable energy companies, because now you can plan out you're not worried about, a sales agreement down in 2-3 years and try and renew it, and you don't have a lot of visibility. Would this just put you right in the driver's seat as far as renewable energy and clean tech goes?
Well, that I like how you're phrasing that. What it puts us in the driver's seat, and obviously there's synergies for our business to have more operational resourcing, and to have a number of projects to really oversee. And from an asset perspective, it's tremendous. But the other advantage is when you have a long-term contract like this, and again, there's different variations of these types of contracts, but when you have these long-term contracts and you're delivering electricity and you're delivering heat, and there's sort of two different components of what you get to charge for that. It also means if along the way, say, sake of argument, our fuel cell or generator components of our fuel cell or our CHP units, we're ready to deploy in a peaking or backup fashion, we can go in and ultimately at our cost decide, hey, we know what the terms are on the contract. We can install more equipment and more money from it. So it's a great starter kit for what we're deploying in Canada to make sure that when our fuel cell and really other clean tech for that matter is ready, we're able to start deploying it in our own assets. And that's a huge difference going forward. Because, I need to have customers who want to use our fuel cells down the road, let's say. And I think it's easier to say, well, if we become the buyers of the fuel cell and we deploy them in our own assets and deliver them to, the end product to customers, we get to help control that sort of quality control of how they get deployed initially. And I think that will come into play nicely in the coming years.
Man, what's amazing, Frank, is that you're not only building a pipeline on the traditional side, which will support the fuel cell side and growth there, but you're also buying a pipeline for the fuel cell side at the end of the day. So it's almost like you're getting a double pipeline out of this, right?
Well, that's, it's difficult. I know there's some people who say, is it confusing what we're building? And there's more to come, so it'll become less confusing. But I think the way to look at it is we really are we have two fundamental hats. One is, yes, we have this fuel cell. We are the technology maker of this fuel cell. And we could sell the fuel cell to people, we could sell them to other integrators, and we can buy them ourselves. But the other hat that's now more prominent because of this announcement is we are developer, owner, operator of plants, of power plants. And if those power plants start using equipment that we happen to have stakes in or own, then it's in our best interest to leverage that for obviously greater margin. So whether the margin comes in the form of a great sale, because we bought our own units and the return on them is great, or it came in the form of better profit for what we get to charge for power to those end consumers. We understand what market we're in. We understand how to, compared to the Northland Powers, all these big power companies out there, they're very good at doing massive billion-dollar projects and bring them to completion, operating them. That's wonderful. And we know where they make their margin. But if we're able to make our margin on replicating projects in homes and buildings, and get to make margin on the actual technology that we're deploying as well, beyond just project managing, installing, and operating it. Again, we think we have a really good secret sauce of how we get to make money at the end of that day. And what's even better in all this, right, is that what we're up against to compete to make sure our margins can work down the road, we're up against electricity rates to consumers that are going to climb. None of them are coming down.
You just know what's going to happen.
So, imagine you're going into a market where the size of the pie keeps growing because people are going to get fed up with what they're paying for electricity rates. So this wouldn't be exciting if we didn't think we had that huge opportunity. And I can't wait to grab our market share of that.
And the ultimate goal, right, Frank, is to make us, our homes, our whatever assets we have, to become our own power plants. You're going to give us the potential.
George, we're bringing power to the people, baby. At the end of the day, people are going to pay way too much for their power because, look, 100 years ago, I'm a big fan of every one of these viewers all know what Uber's done to certain industries. They all know what technology's done. And 120 years ago, we all thought, it makes sense to have these massive central power plants and deliver the electrons through these wires, transmission, distribution, all the way to the end customer. And that's the model. And you have a number of institutional investors who've now invested heavily in those utilities and those systems. But that system can break. That system is not, it can't stand the test of time for what they're charging to deliver, green energy. And I see a scenario on the other end of this in the coming years and decades where far more of your power will come from your own site.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And
When do
that's
you think we get there,
fundamentally
Frank? Big picture. When do you think we get there? When my home is essentially, a self-enclosed power plant, and if I need power, I can kind of grab some from the grid once in a while, or if I've got extra power, I sell it back to the grid. How long
So
until
that
that
should
future?
be the scenario that it's at now. That's where it should be. The only way that works well for, I would say, electric utilities is if they deployed a more lean manufacturing mentality of the distribution of the electrons. If they assume they were the lowest cost option and provider of electrons, then that could work well. And so when you have excess power, send it to the grid. When you need it at peak or backup, you take it. But they're trying to deploy, and not all of them, but there's a game plan in North America to deploy, if you've got $1 billion already invested in the grid that you get to earn your return on, right, in capital, in your utility. You're now saying it's 2 to 3 times that investment has to be made to decarbonize that grid. Who do you think is paying for that? So those rates go up significantly.
Oh, yeah.
Even as other electricity rates should be coming down, your transmission distribution rates continue to skyrocket because that's what's going to take to meet all your demands of when you want to send power to the grid or when you want to actually extract it from the grid. So they're going to make it expensive to want to do those things. And on-site renewables, even the use of heat pumps, solar panels, wind, battery storage, they all have their place in this. And we believe fuel cells, and even in larger applications, ultimately some, cogeneration assets like what we're doing in buildings, for example, will have its day, especially if we can bring clean and renewable power through it, whether it's hydrogen, renewable natural gas. That's what utilities should be worrying about. Is there something that can steal their lunch? And I believe there is.
Well, and you guys are showing it. It's because you're not just talking the talk, you're walking the walk. And I know this specific press release wasn't about your fuel cell, but you've already got multiple pilots announced, and it sounds like multiple more pilots coming. So just like a quick 30 to 60 second, because I think it behooves us to at least talk about that. How's the progress going on launching those pilots? Because you've got the agreements in place. I know you're looking for sites and things like that with the partners. How are those progressing, and when we might?
I think they're progressing well. We have a site in a utility, a rate-regulated utility out in Festival Hydro in southwestern Ontario. So we do have a site. Really, the next step is we're working through, and I can't wait to report any updates on that, but we're working through getting our assets out of Europe and bringing them back to Canada. So that's sort of that next step, so that those pilot projects and subsequent deployment of units will come out of this country, will come out of here. And so that's something we're working through, and we can't wait to give an update to investors on that. What I told everyone, look, it's always fun to do what we said we were going to do. And we said that in 2023 priorities, and we're sticking to it. We're doing everything we said we were going to do, and there's more to come.
Congratulations. Another nice milestone today. It's not closed yet. Of course, we want to repeat that's non-binding, but if it's subject to standard due diligence and you guys already come to terms and everyone agrees on, how this deal is going to come together, fingers crossed, buddy, that we have you back here in the next, 45 days, give or take, to announce that this becomes definitive, and away we go.
I'm sure you'll hear from me soon.
I like that, Frank. You're always laying those breadcrumbs down. So that's awesome. But congrats, my friend. Thanks for taking out the time.
Thanks, George. Have a great day.
For everybody at home, you've been listening or been watched or if you listen by podcast on Spotify, Google, Apple, your favorite podcast platform, it's Frank Carnevale. He's the CEO of Cleantech Power, trades in Canada, PWWR, in the US, PWWRF. For those new to the story, get the company's profile page on Agoracom, because Cleantech and renewable, we all talk about it, but there's so many different applications out there, and this is definitely one of those great differentiated applications. You got to read up on it so you can figure out what the company's doing. Once you've got that in layman's terms, the way we've got laid out, get over to the company's website, do your deep dive due diligence. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. See you next time.
Hey guys, the video's over, but don't forget to help your company by liking it and even leaving a comment below. And then don't forget to help yourself by subscribing to our YouTube channel so you never miss another great Agoracom small cap video.